In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on February 23rd, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Louisville versus North Carolina. Under the lights in Chapel Hill, this one feels like classic high-stakes Atlantic Coast Conference basketball. A ranked Louisville squad walking into a building where North Carolina has not lost all season, and both teams are carrying those shiny 20-7 and 21-6 type records that make the bracket nerds perk up their ears. You have a visiting group that has been rolling, 6 wins in its last 7, fresh off a comfortable win over Georgia Tech, and a home team that just got a little of its swagger back by handling Syracuse, which already gives this matchup a something has to give vibe before you even look at anything else. The twist is that Carolina is not whole, which changes the feel of the usual Tar Heels at home script. Their leading scorer and rebounder, freshman forward Caleb Wilson, is still out with that hand issue, and that is the kind of absence you can feel on every possession because it messes with spacing, late clock options, and even how confident the other guys are when the game gets tight. James Brown is done for the season with a foot injury, Ivan Metlekovic remains sidelined, and suddenly that deep, towering front court everyone talked about back in November has some very real thin spots if foul trouble shows up at the wrong time. Henri Visar coming back changes a lot for them, and you could see it in that Syracuse win when he dropped 19 and looked every bit the 7-foot centerpiece they hoped he would be. His size and touch make life easier for the guards, and defensively he gives them a giant eraser near the rim, but you can also tell he is still at that stage where the staff would rather not run him into the ground with huge minutes every single night. So you have this odd mix where Carolina's ceiling is still very high, yet their margin for error is a little fragile, and that fragility matters when you are facing a Louisville offense that has been punching first and often, scoring at least 80 in 6 of its last 7 and looking perfectly comfortable playing from ahead. On the Louisville side, the identity feels pretty clear now, an aggressive attack built around a dynamic backcourt and multiple shooters who can punish even small defensive lapses. Michael Brown Jr. has been on a tear, leading them in scoring over the past stretch, and he plays with that kind of fearless energy that tends to travel even when the rims, the sightlines, and 18,000 people in different colors are yelling at you. They are not perfect, they have taken their lumps on the road, but when they get into their flow, the ball pops side to side. They put you in closeout after closeout, and little by little it pulls opponents out of their comfort zones and into Louisville's pace and style instead. Here is the thing that keeps nagging at you if you are trying to figure out which way this spread wants to go. North Carolina has the spotless home record and the history in this series, but the current version of the roster is still adjusting to life without its top scorer, leaning heavily on Visar and a supporting cast that has to be almost perfect in their roles, while Louisville arrives with a more stable rotation, more continuity in who they are, and the kind of offensive confidence that usually does not show up if a team does not believe it can walk into a place like this and win. The market reflects that tension. The public still respects the Carolina name, but the bigger money has tilted toward the Cardinals, and when you lay that alongside Louisville's recent surge and the Tar Heels injury picture, it starts to feel like the sort of spot where the sharper side trusts the healthier, freer-flowing team even if it has to go into one of the loudest gyms in the country to get there. As our first pick for this matchup, the Louisville Cardinals to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Louisville has been living in the mid-80s on average. Carolina sits a bit over 80, and on paper that screams fireworks, the kind of night where you barely have time to check your phone between whistles. College hoops in February can be weird though. Shots get tighter, legs get a little heavier, and the minute both coaches sense the game really matters for seeding or a conference double bye, possessions start to mean more than vibes. The Cardinals' scoring profile looks loud, but there is some context hiding under it. A few huge outings, like that 118-point explosion on North Carolina State, stretch the averages, while a lot of their tougher games have settled into more controlled scores once the other side forced them to execute in the half court instead of running in open space for 40 straight minutes. They still share the ball, they still have shooters, but when the opponent lengthens possessions and stays home on shooters, Louisville is willing to grind more often than people think from just glancing at the box scores. Carolina's offense has a similar split personality. The brand name says high octane, but the current roster, without Wilson, leans more into using its size, playing through the bigs, and trusting that a steady stream of good, patient looks is better than turning the whole thing into a sprint that might expose their shortened depth. Their recent results tell a quieter story than their reputation. Only one of their last 5 has really broken loose, and even that came with stretches where they were deliberate, not reckless. When the leading scorer and rebounder is out, other players naturally take on more responsibility, which can slow decision-making just enough to trim a couple of possessions per half, and that matters when any single possession could be the difference between a total sneaking over or stalling out. The numbers from the betting side quietly back that more measured picture. Louisville has seen fewer high-scoring results than you might expect, with unders cashing more often than overs across its season, and despite Carolina's explosive stretches at home, their overall split is basically balanced, with a noticeable lean toward lower totals in recent games. That combination, 2 dangerous offenses whose actual outcomes skew more modest than their reputations, plus the injury cloud over some key Tar Heels, makes this total feel like it is already priced near the top of what this game reasonably produces rather than somewhere in the middle. Here is the part that ties it together. In a game with this much on the line, coaches tend to trust defense and shot selection more than chaos, and even if we get a few wild runs, all it takes is one cold stretch, one whistle-happy stretch of free throws, or one late sequence where the leading team milks clock to keep this from turning into the pure shootout the number suggests on the surface. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Texas A&M Corpus Christi versus SE Louisiana. Hammond turns into a little pressure cooker for this Southland showdown, and the vibe is very much discipline facing desperation. Texas A&M Corpus Christi walks in sitting at 14-14 on the season with Jim Shaw in his 3rd year running the show, which means the identity is pretty set by now. Southeastern Louisiana comes in at 8-20, and that kind of record usually tells you a team has spent a lot of nights learning hard lessons instead of celebrating big wins. The market still gives A&M Corpus Christi a small edge, treating them as the better, sturdier outfit rather than some powerhouse that scares everyone out of the gym. That fits how these teams actually look. The Islanders lean on a defense that ranks in the upper tier of college basketball in points allowed, keeping opponents around the high 60s, while Southeastern's offense lives in the mid-60s and sits near the bottom of Division I in both scoring output and efficiency. It is not just a bad week of shooting, it has become that team's personality. They grind through possessions, struggle to create clean looks, and when they finally do find air, they knock down barely more than 28% of their threes. That kind of shooting is a rough combination against an Islanders defense that limits the perimeter, holds opponents near 30% from deep, and generally refuses to give up easy bailout jumpers. Over time, that wears on shooters, and you can almost feel it when jumpers start hitting the front rim more than the net. Recent history between these two programs backs up what the numbers suggest. Texas A&M Corpus Christi has taken 3 straight in the series, each one decided by at least 9 points, and they have covered the spread every time. This season's earlier meeting finished 68-56 in favor of the Islanders, and even with a bigger number to clear in that one, they still got home without much sweat. In those games, A&M Corpus Christi has consistently looked like the grown-up in the room, more solid on the glass, cleaner in shot selection, and better at turning Southeastern's long, dry spells into actual separation on the scoreboard instead of just moral victories. National prediction models still shade this matchup toward the Islanders with win probabilities in the high 50s% range, while the pricing itself treats the game more like a coin flip. That gap, however small, hints that the current number may not fully respect the difference in stability between these two teams. Home court in Hammond can absolutely give Southeastern some noise and energy. And there is always the chance of one of those odd college nights where everything falls, but their offensive profile is still that of a bottom-tier unit trying to crack a disciplined, defense-first opponent that has already solved this puzzle a few times. With no major new injuries flagged on national reports for either side and both teams expected to lean on their usual rotations from recent games, the same matchup edges we have seen before are still sitting there. In a spot where one side brings the better defense, the more trustworthy scoring profile, and the cleaner recent track record in this specific pairing, the favorite feels more likely to handle what the number is asking. As our first pick for this matchup, the Texas A&M Corpus Christi Islanders to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The total opens in a lower range that already hints at respect for both the tempo and the shot-making issues in play. Southeastern Louisiana's season has been a tug of war with their own offense, sitting around the mid-60s in points per game and ranking near the bottom of the country in both scoring and offensive efficiency. That is not just a few cold shooting nights, it is the full season theme. They slow things down, they spend a lot of time trying to find something they like, and they still end up with under 30% shooting from behind the arc. Texas A&M Corpus Christi brings a defense that fits perfectly against that type of attack. They hold opponents to about 68 points per game, keep field goal percentages below the mid-40s, and clamp down on threes at roughly 30% allowed, landing in the top group nationally in several defensive categories. So you get this mix where one team already struggles to score, and the other one is built specifically to make scoring feel like pulling teeth. On the other side of the ball, the Islanders do their part but do not exactly turn games into fireworks. They usually live in the low 70s in scoring, strong enough to win, not quite built for track meets, and they have shown that when they leave home, the points can really dry up. That recent road loss at McNeese, where they only managed 54, says a lot about how their floor looks when the shots are not falling. In those situations, they lean right back into their defense and trust that a grind is still a game they can live with. Their earlier meeting this season fits that script almost perfectly. The final landed at 68-56, which gives you a total of 124, sitting comfortably below what was projected at the time. Two of the last three matchups between these teams have finished under their closing numbers, and all three have felt like old-school Southland rock fights, with long possessions ending in contested jumpers or free throws after big bodies collide in the lane. Late in the season, when both coaching staffs know each other's sets inside and out, scoring usually gets even harder, not easier. Southeastern is not suddenly turning into a run-and-gun team, and their most realistic way to feel comfortable is to slow the tempo, use the clock, and hope the game stays in that first to about 65 points kind of range. Everything in these profiles points toward a final score that lives closer to something like 63-60 or 66-60. More grind than shootout, more half-court than open floor. Given how these teams already played earlier in the year and how their current numbers look, expecting a lower scoring game makes more sense than hoping for a surprise offensive explosion. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Incarnate Word versus Northwestern State. Incarnate Word Cardinals at Northwestern State Demons on Monday, February 23, 2026, sets up as one of those late-season Southland games where the records do not tell the whole story. It looks like a rough matchup between two struggling teams, with Incarnate Word sitting at 11-17 overall and 6-13 in league play, and Northwestern State at 9-19 with a 7-12 mark in the conference. That sounds ugly, sure, but the moment you factor in where this one is being played, the mood shifts a bit. Northwestern State has been much more comfortable at home, putting together a 6-6 record in Prather Coliseum, which may not sound flashy but does show they are far from a pushover in that building. Incarnate Word, on the other hand, has been the type of team bettors love to fade, with a brutal run of 2-12 against the spread in its last 14 games overall and the same 2-12 straight up in its last 14 on the road. The story gets even worse for the Cardinals when they see purple and orange, as they have gone 0-6 against the spread in their last 6 meetings with Northwestern State, and that sticks in people's minds for a reason. The Demons have done the quieter, more profitable work lately, covering in 4 of their last 5 games and stringing together a 7-1 straight-up stretch in their last 8 home dates against Incarnate Word. In conference terms, Northwestern State has also put together an 11-4 run against the spread against Southland opponents, which hints that the market has been a step slow adjusting to how this team actually performs in these familiar league battles. It is a bit like that coworker who keeps getting underestimated in meetings, yet somehow always ends up closing the deal. The first clash between these two this season adds another layer to the picture. In San Antonio, Northwestern State actually shot over 53% from the field and still walked away with a 76-74 loss on the road, basically dropping a 2-point heartbreaker in a game they could easily argue they controlled for stretches. Now that same matchup swings into their home gym with a small margin required, and the Demons get a chance to clean up what felt like unfinished business the first time around, with the home crowd behind them and the same opponent that has not traveled well all year. As our first pick for this matchup, the Northwestern State Demons to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Incarnate word games this season have rarely felt friendly to low totals, with the Cardinals averaging 75.5 points scored and 74.8 allowed, which puts their typical game right around the 150-point neighborhood all by itself. That kind of profile usually signals pace, mistakes, and enough shot making to keep both defenses under pressure for most of the night. Northwestern State's scoring profile is a touch more modest, at 70.1 points for and 73.6 against, but that still puts their average outing in the mid-140s. When you combine one team that naturally drifts high with another that already lives in the mid-range of that band, you get the framework for a total that can be cleared without either side playing the game of their lives. College hoops in late February often brings tired legs on defense and more willing shooters on offense, which can tilt things a few possessions at a time. The first time these two saw each other, they combined for 150 points in that 76-74 result, and they did it without needing overtime. Nothing about that game screamed outlier. It looked more like what happens when both teams get into a rhythm, trade runs, and neither defense can consistently stack stops. It is easy to remember that kind of game because it feels exactly like the sort of back and forth you expect in a conference rematch later in the season. If you flip over to recent totals trends, the numbers might sound like they are arguing for the other side at first glance. Incarnate word has gone under in 4 of its last 6 games, and Northwestern State has joined the under party in 7 of its last 9, with unders also hitting in 5 of the Demons' last 6 at home. That all sounds like the scoreboard should be quieter, but those results have often come in spots where the totals were set higher and where one offense had a cold shooting night that dragged the whole number down. The underlying offensive profile still suggests scoring potential. Incarnate word has been knocking down close to 38% of its threes and making almost 9 of them per game, which adds volatility and gives their games a kind of "here we go again" feel whenever a shooter gets loose for a couple of possessions. Northwestern State, for its part, has been living at the stripe with more than 16 made free throws per contest, and those freebies matter because they stop the clock and keep points trickling onto the board even when the ball is not going through the net from the floor. Put 2 defenses that each allow opponents to live in the mid-70s into the same gym. Add the possibility of a tight finish that encourages fouls and free throws late, and you end up with a setup where a fairly normal offensive night by both sides can see the combined score push past what the market expects. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. HCU versus East Texas A&M. Houston Christian heads to East Texas for a late February matchup on February 23, 2026 in Commerce, and it feels like one of those Southland games where both benches already know each other's playbook by heart. The first meeting told a pretty loud story. Houston Christian handled their business at home and walked away with an 11-point win, which was not exactly a lucky bounce kind of result, more like a steady squeeze across 40 minutes. Now the scene flips to the field house. The rims are different, the crowd is wearing different colors, but the personalities of these two teams have not changed much. On the surface, East Texas carries that slightly shinier profile, sitting at 11-18 with 6-13 in league play and putting up a bit over 70 points per night. Houston Christian is at 10-18 with the same 6-13 in conference, scoring just under 68 points per game. It sounds like a small gap, and honestly, it is. The twist shows up when you look at how those numbers were built. East Texas' scoring average is pulled upward by a few loud nights against overmatched opponents, those early season games where everything falls and the scoreboard looks like something from an arcade machine. In regular conference grind mode, they are much closer to Houston Christian in feel, a team with a negative scoring margin, a noticeable rebounding deficit, and a defense that lets plenty of opponents breathe. Houston Christian, by contrast, wears the underdog label pretty comfortably. They are not blowing people out, but they hang around like that one team you cannot shake even when you think you have momentum. They give up almost 73 points a game, which is far from perfect, but they take reasonably good care of the ball at around 12.5 turnovers a night, and they are only slightly underwater on the glass. That combination does not sound glamorous, but for a road team catching points, it is very practical. You are not getting a team that self-destructs with constant giveaways. You are getting a group that forces favorites to work for separation possession after possession. The first meeting really reinforces that angle. Houston Christian did not sneak by on a miracle shot. They won by double digits while showing they can handle East Texas style in a more deliberate half-court setting. Once you give coaches 40 minutes of film on each other, small tactical edges tend to shrink, which usually helps the side that already proved it can survive the matchup without leaning on home whistles. Home court still matters. The Lions will be more comfortable in their own gym and they will feed off their crowd, but it is hard to argue they suddenly turned into a reliable pull-away team when the season-long scoring margin sits in the red. Another layer that quietly supports the visitors is stability. Current public reports list no injuries for either team, so we are not bracing for any surprise stars sitting out or patched together rotations that could distort what we saw the first time around. That kind of continuity often narrows gaps rather than widens them, because both sides lean on the same core pieces and the same tendencies that have been on film all season. When you mix all of that together, the home side wearing the favorite tag and the road side already owning a convincing head-to-head win, the profile that feels a little more trustworthy against the number is the one that has already shown it can turn this matchup into a long, uncomfortable arm wrestle rather than a runaway. As our first pick for this matchup, the Houston Christian Huskies to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. East Texas comes in with a scoring average a touch above 70 points per game and a defense giving up nearly 75, while Houston Christian sits just under 68 on offense and almost 73 allowed. Add those together and you get game totals that hover in the low to mid 140s, which naturally makes people think of higher scores and free-flowing offense. The catch is that those season-long numbers are inflated by a handful of track meet type nights that are not very representative of a late February conference rematch. Some of East Texas' defensive stats are warped by games where they faced high-powered attacks that pushed tempo and poured in points, the kind of matchups where you blink and there are already 20 points on the board. Houston Christian's games have a similar quirk. When both sides are capable of being dragged into quicker paces by certain opponents, their averages reflect that, even if their normal comfort zone is slower and more deliberate. In this particular pairing, what we saw in the first meeting was an 81-70 finish, which landed in a higher scoring window but also gave both staffs a clear picture of where the defensive breakdowns came from and which actions created the cleanest looks. Second meetings inside a conference often trend toward more discipline on that side of the ball. Coaches circle the possessions that hurt them, they tweak help assignments, they adjust closeout angles, and they remind players where the backdoor cuts and ghost screens came from last time. That does not guarantee a brick fest, but it usually trims easy points. With both teams having similar offensive limitations, average shooting from distance, and no major injuries listed that would force wild experimental lineups, the stage is set for a game where effort and familiarity slow things down a notch. Houston Christian does not play like a team that wants constant end-to-end chaos. They prefer to work the ball, find a decent look, and avoid donations in transition the other way. East Texas can open things up at times, but in a tight matchup with clear familiarity, there is a strong pull toward safer half-court possessions rather than blind sprints. It is also late in the season, legs are a little heavier, scouting is sharper, and every possession feels more precious. All of that usually shaves a handful of points off what the raw season averages might suggest. Many broad projection models will lean higher just by feeding those averages and defensive numbers into their formulas, which creates some tension between the math on paper and the feel of the spot. Here, the combination of rematch familiarity, modest shot-making profiles, and a tendency for late-season conference games to clog up just a bit points toward a scoring environment that is more controlled than wild, more grind than fireworks show. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Houston versus Kansas. Allen Fieldhouse on a big stage feels like a place where physics and sound both take the night off. Houston walks in carrying the label of the better team on paper, with a stronger record and higher national ranking, while Kansas brings one of the most hostile home crowds in college hoops and a long history of big game swagger in that building. The matchup looks like a tug of war between people who trust numbers and people who trust banners, echoes, and history. Houston's season has been defined by a defense that tightens like a vice as games go on, squeezing opponents into late clock situations and contested looks possession after possession. Their typical night has been a mix of solid scoring and very stingy protection of their own rim, which shows up in that hefty average scoring margin that has followed them through the conference grind. That kind of identity travels, even into an arena that does not usually welcome visiting heroes. Kansas, for its part, still owns that mystique at home, where runs seem to come in waves and the crowd can flip momentum in the span of one or two possessions. Under this staff, Kansas has stacked up an almost absurd record in spotlight games in that building, and the idea of fading them there often feels a little reckless. Yet this version of Kansas, while very talented, has also shown some cracks, including a recent rough home loss that reminded everyone they are not completely untouchable on their own floor. Roster-wise, Houston brings a backcourt and wing group that fits their personality, with guards who can handle pressure, get into the paint, and step into threes without blinking, plus long bodies that crash the glass and contest everything. Their main rotation pieces are available, while some depth guards are effectively parked on the shelf, which keeps the core minutes stable but trims the emergency options a bit. Kansas counters with a strong mix of size and skill, including a powerful interior presence and wings who can create their own looks, but one of their headlining guards has dealt with a stop-and-start season physically, which makes his true workload feel like a game-time storyline every night. When a team leans on a star who has had that kind of choppy availability, it introduces a little uncertainty that shows up most clearly when possessions get tight against a defense that refuses to give anything easy. The interesting wrinkle comes from how often Houston responds after being punched in the mouth. Under this coach, their teams have built a long trend of bouncing back quickly after losses, and they now find themselves in the rare position of trying to stop a skid instead of simply protecting a winning streak. That history does not guarantee anything tonight, but it tells you a lot about how they usually handle adversity and how sharp their focus tends to be when they feel a little embarrassed. Odds makers are still comfortable asking Houston to be the one that carries the favorite tag on the road here, which says quite a bit about how the underlying numbers and models view the gap between these two right now. If the home court mystique was enough on its own, that label probably shifts, yet the market keeps nudging toward the team that has been more consistent possession by possession throughout the season. So you get this collision between Houston's cold, disciplined style and Kansas' emotional, crowd-driven energy. And when you strip away the noise, the steadier profile still leans toward the visitors handling their business across 40 minutes. As our first pick for this matchup, the Houston Cougars to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Houston games have often landed below expectations because their defense drags opponents into mud and their offense is comfortable winning ugly, while Kansas games have also leaned toward lower totals more often than not this season. On the surface, it feels almost automatic to expect another rock fight. The twist is that both offenses, when you step back from the vibes and look at the seasoned body of work, are more than capable of pushing a game into healthier scoring territory. Houston averages points in the high 70s while holding opponents in the low 60s on a typical night, which means their games actually carry a decent gap between what they score and what they allow. Kansas lives in a similar offensive neighborhood, usually landing somewhere in the upper 70s themselves, with enough shot making to turn short bursts into full runs. If you mash those general scoring profiles together, you do not get a script that screams sleepy, low-number slugfest. You get something closer to a normal, energetic modern college game. Kansas is also coming off that ugly home performance where they let an opponent hang a big total in their own gym, and that kind of result tends to sting. Teams with that kind of pride usually show up in the next marquee spot with a cleaner offensive plan, more purposeful cuts, and a little extra urgency when it comes to getting their best scores into rhythm early. It would not be surprising to see set plays drawn up to get their big man quick touches inside and their key wings some early downhill chances, just to calm everyone down and reassert control of the building. Houston, on the other side of the ball, has looked a bit clunky on offense in its recent slide, but the ingredients for better nights are still there. They have guards who can get 2 feet in the paint, shooters who have proven they can hit from outside over a large sample of games, and a strong habit of living at the free throw line. When solid shooters go through a rough patch, the most reasonable expectation over time is not that the slump defines them, but that they drift back toward their season averages. That kind of quiet regression is not flashy, but it is often what nudges a total higher than people expect. There is also the late-game script to consider, which matters a lot for anyone thinking about how many points end up on the board. A tight contest between two proud programs often results in a parade to the foul line in the final minutes, with one side extending the game and the other cashing in at the stripe. Houston's and Kansas free throw shooting both sit in a healthy range, so those trips are likely to matter instead of being wasted chances. What looks like a modest scoring game with a few minutes left can quickly turn into something much more robust once those intentional fouls start stacking up and possessions stretch out. The market has clearly leaned into the reputations of these teams as defensively serious, under-friendly groups, which drags the expectation for scoring down closer to a bruising script. Yet the season-long scoring numbers, the bounce-back motivation on the Kansas side, the likelihood of Houston's shooters edging back toward their normal levels, and the very real possibility of extended late-game fouling all combine into a picture that is friendlier to points than many people want to admit. So instead of treating this like another automatic low-scoring guess, it makes more sense to lean toward a game that creeps into a higher band, fueled not by a track meet, but by efficient possessions, steady free throws, and a frantic final stretch that keeps the scoreboard busy. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.